if you want to take advantage of a political situation, you always can, provided you found a religious excuse for it. We're here in St. Ethelburga's Church. It's a very exciting place because it's one of the oldest medieval churches in the city of London. This is a Norman church. You can tell we have kind of Gothic arches here, which are the ones that are slightly peaked. Anything older than that would be Romanesque. But this church has made it through the Great Fire of London. It's been bombed and she's still standing, which is what we love about medieval architecture. One of the things that makes the Middle Ages is the fact that the church is the undisputed arbiter of what religion is, at least in Western Europe. The church is really instrumental in defining who can get married and why. They do things like encourage you to go on crusade. They are involved in political life at every level. The people who are in the church have come from the big political families around Europe. So if you're somebody's second or third son and they are going to become a nobleman, you're going to go into the church. They really do think that the way the world works is that you need to be working to go to heaven, and the church is the means by which you do that. The way that medieval people think about religion is not like the modern conception where you're seen as having a personal relationship with God. It's more about the idea that you are a sinner and you're going to need some help in order to get to heaven. So one of the things that exists as a result of that is the church. They very much see themselves as shepherds. That's something that they'll say a lot. And what they're doing is they're offering pastoral care. And this is a way of helping people avoid sin or slough off sin so that they do eventually get to heaven. It's more about seeing yourself within a Christian community who is attempting to do the right thing, and less about yourself as an individual who needs to do the right thing. Fear of the afterlife is a really important idea in the Middle Ages. When you die, you're either going to go to one of two places, heaven or hell, at the end of the world. In between, the idea is that most people are going to go to purgatory. Purgatory isn't limbo. Purgatory is hell with a timer. So you are going to go to hell. You're going to experience the torments of the damned, but that is going to help you to slough off your sin, purge yourself of it, and then you'll get to go to heaven eventually. So yes, you're going to try to live a good life, but for example, you'll see stuff like rich people try to endow monasteries when they're getting near the end of their life because they know they've done bad stuff and they want people to pray for their souls in the afterlife. Things like this are created specifically because people are frightened of going to hell or spending too much time in purgatory. The way to think about a diocese in the medieval period is it's sort of like the managers of the church that they set to a new place to look after you. The thing that they're going to want to make sure is that you're doing the right thing according to Rome. So you have a bishop at the head of the diocese. In the first place, he mediates back and forth with Rome, but then on the other hand, he controls the cathedral. That is going to be like the main business center for the church. And then in the more local communities, you have the smaller parish churches like this one where you talk to your priest. So your priest can then go up to the bishop, and then the bishop can go up to the archbishop, and then they can talk to Rome more directly. So you always have a line going back to the papacy. A way of thinking about dioceses is they're the ones doing the legal work of the church. Canon law is a real form of law, and they're the ones that are promulgating that, making sure that it exists. There's always friction between the papacy and secular rulers, especially when it comes to things like choosing bishops or archbishops. This is something that we refer to as the investiture controversy or the investiture contest. And to be fair to secular rulers, before you get to about the year 1000, yeah, they totally get to choose bishops. But as the church becomes more powerful, they want to make sure that the bishops are more connected with Rome and less indebted to the varying rulers that they work for, in theory. For example, we see the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV, in real trouble with Rome as a result of this. He gets excommunicated which is a really big deal because it's not just that you're going to go to hell, that's in there, but also other Christian rulers can attack you if you have been excommunicated and take your lands. So this whole thing comes to a head with what we call the Walk to Canossa, where Henry is made to go to Canossa in the Italian Alps in winter and stand outside barefoot for 3 days in the snow begging the Pope for forgiveness, which he does get. Secular rulers will absolutely use church authority in order to get a leg up on each other. If you're a member of nobility and you want to take some land from somebody else, and you think they're doing things that are kind of sinful, you could tell the papacy, get them excommunicated, and then you are allowed to take that land. If you can get the papacy to declare a city as being under interdict, then sometimes actually ordinary people get involved as well. They don't want to be cut off from the church. That applies political pressure from the ground up. This we see play out throughout the medieval period, and it's one of the real worries. If you want to take advantage of a political situation, you always can, provided you found a religious excuse for it. The origins of the Great Schism are really interesting because essentially what it comes down to is that the papacy believed that they should control all Christians. And that's really cute. But as far as everyone over in the Eastern Church are concerned, those are just the bishops of Rome. But over in the East, you have, the Patriarch of Constantinople, the most important city in medieval Europe. You have the Patriarch of Jerusalem or the Patriarch of Alexandria. These are really important cities that are more closely connected with early Christianity than Rome really is. So it doesn't make any sense to them from their perspective that the Bishop of Rome would control them at all. But the papacy keeps pushing this over and over and over. And eventually everybody in the East just says, we're not having any of this anymore. What it comes down to is that the papacy was trying to make a power grab for all of Christianity, and for half of Europe, that's just not how they see it. Over the high and late medieval period, church rites really develop a lot. We see the introduction of a larger emphasis on regular confession. So people need to go and say what sins they've committed. They're supposed to get their penance, and then that means if they die tomorrow, you're not going to spend as much time in purgatory. Similarly, around this time, we see a big emphasis on what we call pastoral care. So that's making sure that people have lots of good sermons so that they can keep their mind on God, keep themselves focused, and keep themselves from sinning. And as a result, we also see certain groups crop up particularly to do these things. So the Franciscans, for example, are specifically created in order to make sure that people are getting this pastoral care, making sure they have someone who they can go to say confession or they can hear sermons from on a regular basis. Over time, certain things sometimes come from the people themselves. So in the late medieval period, we see a big emphasis on regular people wanting to take communion all the time. And the church really don't want that because specifically, they don't want to pay for the wine at communion. Like, it's about them being cheap. And this will become a problem later on when more and more people are asking very specifically for this particular rite. We do see that church rites can vary region to region in terms of what it is people want. So we see this particularly, for example, with communion. So there's a huge emphasis on regular communion, for example, here in England with people like the Lollards in the later medieval period, or among the Bohemians with people like the Hussites in the later medieval period. These people want regular access to having communion. We will also see that in certain places, people want to be able to say confession more often, for example. That's especially true in the Italian lands, and that's why the Franciscans really come from there. So we do see responses at a church level in each of these places. Individual popes really will have a lot to do with the development of rites at particular times. So, for example, the emphasis on confession is one that comes from a papal place as well as from ordinary people, because there is this understanding that if people are going to go to purgatory after they die, then yeah, they should have a way to kind of lessen those sins over time. So the papacy responds to that. We also see individual popes really drive varying ideas. For example, Pope Gregory the Great is responsible for the Gregorian reforms. That's stuff like saying the clergy can't get married. anymore. We see Pope Innocent III really crack down on what he sees as legal abuses within the church. He really wants to make sure that the church is a legal organism that can make sure that everything is being administered in the correct way. And that has knock-on effects for church rights as well. Having said that, a lot of the times those particular popes are picked because the cardinals believe in those things too. So if you know that you really care about confession, you're going to make sure you select a candidate for pope who feels the same way. None of this stuff comes out of nowhere. There's always a politics behind it. And these are things that people believe in and will push forward at different times as a result. So an ecumenical council is something that is going to be called particularly by really big higher-ups in the church, like the Pope or the Patriarch of Constantinople. And these are going to discuss really big ideas about dogma. In the earlier medieval period, ecumenical councils help us sort through what we call Trinitarianism, or what is considered Orthodox Catholicism. So God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that's all one big glob, versus Arianism, which is the idea that there is a strict order with God the Father at the top, then Jesus, then the Holy Spirit down the bottom. Synods do debate points of dogma, but they can also be called by bishops just because they need to kind of rein in administrative problems in the local area. So for example, in 14th century Prague, we see a synod get called because a lot of the local priests are running brothels, and the bishop has to tell them to knock that stuff off. So a synod can be something that is a little bit more local, and it can have to do with just what individual practice is happening, and it can be to call particular priests in to do the right thing, whereas an ecumenical council is just looking at the big overall dogmatic picture. It could mean that you have a big dogmatic disagreement with the church, like the good men and women of Languedoc. They have a real different idea about how sin works and how individual participation with the church should work as well. So of course the church cracks down on that. But then sometimes in the cases, for example, of the Lollards in England or the Hussites in Bohemia, it could just be about how a particular practice is going to cost a little bit of money. So that's declared a heresy. What happens is if the church says you're a heretic, you are. But if you have a church where someone is at the top and it is a legal entity, which the medieval church is, yeah, they can decide what's legal and what isn't. The story of the medieval church is about gaining legal control over the mechanism of Christianity in Europe. So in the earlier medieval period, local practice dominates how ordinary people live and work. And in the later medieval period, the church itself is making decisions, and that is trickling down through the diocese to ordinary people. They spend the entire period attempting to get power, and as a result, they're much more able to decide what happens with people's lives and who is and is not a heretic.